from Habakkuk 2, verse 2. Then the Lord answered me and said, write the vision, make it plain on tablets, so that a runner may read it. This is the word of our Lord. Thanks be to God. My name is Louis Casey Thompson. You know me mostly as Casey, but my full name is Louis Casey Thompson, and I was named after both of my grandfathers. Herbert Giles Casey the first, there are now 4, who has my mother's father. He was a saint with a 5th grade education who earned his living as a foreman on oil rigs in the South, all across the South. And then as an air-cooled VW and Porsche mechanic. If you want to know why I drive a Beetle, it's in his honor. If you want to know why I would own a 1971 Super Beetle without being at all mechanical, it's in his honor. He is the grandfather that I knew well, that we saw all the time, that didn't live terribly far from us. My other grandfather was named Louis Krill, Grandpa Lou. And in actuality, I share no DNA with him. In a better world, I would have been called Charles Casey Thompson, but Charles and Helen were unable to care for my father when he was young. And so my father was raised by his extended family, each taking a spell until he landed with Helen's sister, Ruth, and her husband, Lou, who raised him as their own. If you want to know why Connect Our Kids resonates so deeply with me, you can start there. Now, my father's side of the family was a mystery to us. And so when I look back, they've taken on an outsized importance in my imagination. They did that when I was young and as I grew. I only met my namesake a handful of times, and my father's siblings/cousins a handful of times as well. Until about a year ago, I'd only visited my father's hometown of Mercer, Pennsylvania once in my life as a small child, and I have only fleeting memories of it. And yet my father, who was mostly silent about his history as I grew up, was a gifted storyteller. And so the snatches of history I did have were just fascinating to me. There's the glowing green man of Western PA. He actually existed. There's a documentary about him. Only discovered that last year. There is the summer spent quarantined from polio out on a farm that belonged to a family friend. There's the misguided game of mailbox baseball where my father was personally responsible for the premature death of 21 mailboxes in his hometown. The only time I know he was ever arrested. And the record for consecutive backflips on the trampoline at Mercer High School, and the fact that his classmates had named him Fearless Fred Thompson and had voted him most likely to die young. He turned 84 2 months ago, so take that, class of 58. He was wild though. That's pretty clear. He would eventually, well, mellow is probably the right word, but it started with discipline. He joined the Army and became a Green Beret at Fort Bragg in the 1960s. And then he met my mother on a jump field after jumping out of an airplane, which is a great way to meet your future spouse. His classmates were almost right. He was discharged the same week that his platoon of soldiers were sent over to Saigon. Most of them never came back. If you ask my dad about growing up, he might tell you about working in Lou's hardware store on the town square in Mercer. He's told me about it. It's where he learned to talk to people, he said. It's where he learned he could be valuable. It's a common setting for a story of his, the family hardware store. And so that hardware store, closed down since the 1960s, has always been this romantic locale in my imagination. Now, a year and a half ago, I took my youngest child, Lily, up to Slippery Rock University for a visit in Western Pennsylvania. where I discovered just how close it was to Mercer. I realized they couldn't have been that far apart, but they were literally 10 miles. And 10 miles of country road. I could be there in 15 minutes. So I skipped one of the parent meetings and drove over. I called home. My dad wasn't there. He was out for something. But my mom helped me find my dad's old house. So I stood in front of it. But what I really wanted to see was the hardware store. She helped me locate it. It was closed down. Now, it'd been closed down since the 60s, a hardware store. But she was like, the last time we were there, it was a quilting store, and that quilting store had been shut down, and they said, you know, you can call this number if you need something. I didn't call it. I had to get back. I had some duties and so forth and so on. But I was very disappointed. I've been hearing about this hardware store all of my life, and it seemed as if it held some of the mysteries of who my father was. I really wanted to go in there. Sort of called to me, right? Through the gratitude and the pain of it all of my father's life. It's pretty overwhelming. Now, I have been doing some backward looking lately, perhaps as a way to look forward. We just passed the 10th anniversary of the Commonplace, which is the nonprofit I started with colleagues of mine in Philadelphia. It's one of the great things that I've been able to be involved in my life. At the service that Sunday, Sean James, who's the lead pastor of the merged congregation inside the Commonplace, Salt and Light, announced that there was a $3 million grant that the church was able to receive in order to start a resiliency center for young people in that neighborhood. Now let me remind you for a moment, because I've told you this story before, but I don't expect you to have perfect memories, that the church inside that nonprofit was once about this size. Now they're flourishing. In part because the remnant of that faithful had said yes to a number of things. It was yes to new leadership, and yes to new ministries in their building, and yes to help from the outside, and yes to this other church that might merge with them. It was the reason that I thought merging here might make some sense. I had seen it work marvelously before. I'm no longer of that thought. And listen, Sean is an extraordinary leader, and he would have made something like that happen regardless of where he served. And I think there are wonderful things that are going to happen at Knox Presbyterian Church too, our sister church, that could be more like that model of the Commonplace. And if you want to help me with that, please do. I know better how to build something like that. That's what's been going on in my head. I know how better to build something like that than run a coffee shop. This is what's been going on in my head. It's really interesting. It's an idea. I like it. But it's more in my wheelhouse. Which is to say, I was a little more apprehensive about that if that's what we decide to do. Now, I've told people that what I really like about serving both of these churches is that it sort of speaks to both sides of my history and my personality. And really, as I was reading this morning again, I realized, oh, you guys are Grandpa Lou's church. And those guys are Poppy Casey's church. That's why it resonates so deeply with me. For all my life, I have been serving sort of two different populations and groups of people, and I didn't really realize how much it was sort of rooted in my own family history. But I digress. Sean's announcement of that $3 million grant sent me back to some of our founding documents at the Commonplace. We had this internal naming system at the Commonplace for our ministries, which we kind of used as a joke more than anything. We just stuck the word common in front of whatever it was going to be. So, whenever I see the word common in something, it sort of jumps out at me. Now, common worship was the name of the worship that we did. Common prayer was going to be the name of the prayer service that we did. Common prayer is how we talked about that contemplative prayer. Now, it took on a different name, the name Holy Rest afterward, but its first name was Common Prayer. Common Law was going to be the name of the legal aid service, and Common Sense was going to be etc. You get the point. I had forgotten a piece of it, though, until I was rereading that founding document and came rushing back, because that part of it wasn't in the Commonplaces neighborhood, it was in my own. There'd been a senior community center in the Wherein Presbyterian Church parking lot. And rumor had it, they were going to move out and sell the property. It's maybe 40 yards from my office. 20 yards opposite the train station that hundreds of people pass through every day on their way into work in Philly. I had suggested that we buy it as a church and turn it in what I called a pro-social business at that time, but would probably be called a social enterprise now. I hadn't gone into detail in the document, but I had thought it would be the perfect space for a coffee shop. All these people going into Philadelphia, passing by all at the same time. In fact, it was such a perfect place for that 6 months later, the train station just decided to do it by themselves. But I thought we could buy it, we could rehab it, we could staff it with volunteers from the church because we had plenty for that. We give all the proceeds to this new venture called The Commonplace. We could also open it up to this, as a meeting place for our own community. I was really excited about it, actually, until they told us they weren't moving. And so I sort of forgot about it. But I'd already named it, of course. Common Grounds. Well, The Commonplace did fine without it, but I was thinking I might suggest the name to you, sort of as an internal joke for me. We can call it Common Grounds until we decide with something else. Now, this week, I drove up to see Lily's end of the year concert and drive her back after her first year of college. I'd be happy to introduce you to her if she were not still asleep, which she is. I wrote that on Wednesday with high confidence it will still be true, and it is. On Monday, I checked into my hotel room and I had a few hours, so I drove straight over to Mercer, my dad's hometown. My dad's hardware store had been calling me like a beacon. I'm not sure I can really describe to you how powerful this impulse was. I just wanted to see it. I was ready to go in, whatever was there, I was going to negotiate with them and say, if it's a law firm, just let me see it. Whatever I needed to do, whatever it took. I drove up, there was no longer that sign from the quilting shop. That didn't surprise me, it had been over a year and a half, but I popped out of the car and went to peer in the window. The lights were on and I saw someone walking forward and then veering into the next storefront. And that's right, I thought. They turned the two spaces into a larger one. So I looked over at the door next to me. Now, if I've done my job properly in the sermon, if I foreshadowed it in the right way and built the structure just so, you should be able to tell me what kind of small business was in my father's old shop. Coffee shop. A small nudge from God. Wonderful. I've been thinking about this nearly constantly over the last few weeks. And of course, it's not surprising to see a coffee shop in a small storefront in the center of town, right? That's not a big deal. But there, it felt like this gentle nudge from God. Now, if I've done my job properly in this sermon, if I've given you enough time and you recognize I'm asking the question, since I'm asking the question, it must be significant in some way and you should be able to figure it out, what do you think the name of that coffee shop was?
Common Grounds.
Common Grounds. And that felt like more than just a gentle nudge. It felt like a little flick of the ear, like, pay attention, Casey. I know you don't know how to do this, but pay attention. Not you, me. I don't know how to do this, right? Pay attention. I walked in, expectantly. I announced, my father grew up here. And they all looked at me like I was, I asked for black coffee and some room for cream, and I turned to pay, and the sign at the cashier said, please be patient with our wonderful volunteers. And I asked the wonderful volunteer, "Wait, you volunteer here?" And they said, "Yes, it's a nonprofit coffee shop." I said, "Are you kidding me?" She said, "It's intended to be a space for anyone in our community who's lonely or depressed or anxious, for at-risk youth or kids or veterans who need help. But basically, it's a place that people can come and be in community with each other." Right? In that moment, pastors go up and down in our lives. We have moments where we're very filled with the Spirit, and moments where we're spiritually dead. I had been spiritually dead a few years ago. This is the sort of place that would have been good for me. But at this moment, I'm thinking, you've got to be kidding. I have been just like pulled to this one location for the last year and a half, like a tractor beam in a Star Wars movie, and you've turned it into the very thing that I think God is asking us to do. I didn't say this out loud. The barista said she was baking some new coffee. It might need a moment, but I was welcome to look around. I noticed there were some stairs. I said, "Is the upstairs open?" She said, "Of course, go up there, take a look." And I thought, if there are artist studios upstairs, I'm going to be a little offended that God thinks I need this much of a sign. I'm not really one who thinks of signs. This is not usually, God usually more of a gentle nudge, prayers, etc., but okay. I went upstairs and there were no artist studios, just different places to sit or to work or to meet or to read. I FaceTimed my dad. I showed him around. I drank my coffee. It was wonderful. Now, when I finished my coffee, the woman behind the counter, the one who was obviously in charge of it all, asked me if I'd like some more. I said, "No, I'll never be able to sleep tonight." And that was true, but not because of the coffee. I asked her to tell me more about this place. And the first thing she said was, "Well, I was the one given the vision 5 years ago." And I thought, oh no. So I'm a raging skeptic, and I spend around a lot of time with people who said they've been given visions about things, and by and large what that usually means is, I wanted to do this thing. And God said, okay. But, I stopped. I said, okay, listen to this. I'd received a vision myself after all about the commonplace. One I didn't share with too many people because, well, I didn't want to come off that way. And one of the people I did share it with, Aisha, the minister I helped create it with, she stopped me and said, I dreamed about this. I've had a dream about this place. I had the same vision years ago. And I remember thinking then, okay, I'll do my best, God, get out of the way of what you're doing. I will not be so fixed on my own idea of how it ought to be, but I'll get out of the way and let God do the work. That's my job as the pastor or the authority in this system, is not to use that authority in any way to stifle God's work in any way. So back to this woman in the coffee shop. I had a vision that we should do this work, she said. We knew people needed more community, but we didn't know how until this. I said, do you have experience opening coffee shops? And she said, no, but there's this group about 30 miles from us who taught us how to do this. I said, really? That's Riverside for us, by the way. He's coming to talk to you in 2 weeks. She was like, yeah, I just went and I learned how to do it. And this place was in pretty bad shape. It took us about a year to get it ready. And while we did that, we sort of learned how to do this. We give all the proceeds away to community groups that we support, or they were going to. I mean, they're so new that their grand opening is actually tomorrow. If I come a day later, they were actually going to be closed for training. I drove back to my hotel. I called Casey. I told her all about it. I got ready for the concert, and I had a few minutes before I had to leave, so I looked up the coffee shop that she trained at as the leader for Common Grounds. It's called Fresh Grounds. But if you look at their website, it says Fresh Grounds in Sans Mocha. Fresh Grounds in Sans Mocha. Fresh Grounds in Sans. What is Sans Mocha? Doesn't make any sense, and so I click on that, and this is what it said, and I quote: "Located on the second floor of our coffee shop building, Sans Moco operates as a platform to promote the fine arts in Greenville through our curated art exhibitions and introductory art classes." Okay, God, I get it. I get it. I remember thinking then what I thought 11 or 12 years before. I have to do my best, I think, to get out of the way of what God is doing. Not to be so fixed on my own ideas, but get out of the way and let God work. That's my job as pastor. It's not to use my authority to stifle God's work in any way. And that happens way more than you might think. Now, this story may not hit you in the same way it hit me. After all, it wasn't your dad's hardware shop. After all, you don't have my particular religious history. After all, you didn't live the actual story. I'm not usually into the notion of science, but I do believe that God is saying to me that this is what we ought to do. Write the vision, Habakkuk says. Make it plain. Make it so plain that Casey can see it. So let me make it plain in the way that I think God has made it plain to me. I think we should turn this place into a community coffee shop and still be a church. Let that part be clear as well. But something for our neighborhood where people from the community can come, anyone who's lonely or anxious or depressed or at risk or just in need of space, and that we can serve our neighborhood in this way. That we can use all the proceeds to help that which remains here or the community at large. That we can receive training about how to do this. That we can help support artists and help those artists support the community through their engagement in classes. But that God has an intention for us here in this space. And I look forward to the day that someone walks in, wondering at it all, and says to us, you know, my dad got baptized right up there. I look forward to the day where visions become reality. I don't know what it'll look like just yet, but I do know that your sense that we can do something here is right. Maybe so.